Good morning, everyone. This is Bob Ferguson, and it is my distinct pleasure to have back with me today John Norwood, who is running for Secretary of Agriculture for Iowa. And just like I did a policy interview with Mike Heaton last night, this is really going to be a policy talk. John's got a very, very exciting concept that he calls the Iowa Farm Bill, and related to his slogan, which I heartily agree with, is Iowa built to last. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's talk about how
Yeah,
we construct the kind of a system so that we can have an Iowa that's built to last.
yeah. Well, so we start with, and it's great to be with you, Bob, and your listeners again. I think we were together almost a week ago, and we got some good work done in that amount of time. And you wanted to explore a little bit more part two here in terms of this Iowa Farm Bill that John is starting to talk about, and it fits underneath the theme of my campaign, which is Iowa built to last. It's the idea that I think most Iowans would agree that we would like to build Iowa so that it is sustainable for future generations, and in the face of climate change and other economic forces and so forth. This is one of the world's most important growing regions. I mean, it's important not just to Iowa, it's important to the United States, it's really important to the world. So the idea is the system as we see it today, it's not built to last. Whether you look at the massive soil loss, the $3 billion a year we're sending down our rivers, the water quality impacts, the billion pounds of nitrates, and the hollowing out and the decline of our rural communities as the agricultural system as we know it today scales. It's highly productive, but we need to begin to figure out how we add in the resiliency, the diversity, the inclusiveness, and the flexibility. Those are four concepts. And so the Iowa Farm Bill would be a strategy. I can't do it by myself. I can sort of throw it out there and say, hey, let's have a strategy. Let's bring in the legislature. Let's bring in the governor. Let's bring in the 99 counties. And we begin to use that framework of the Iowa Farm Bill and the vision of Iowa Built to Last to begin to organize what we need to do to begin to build in that durability and talk about the different systems, whether we're talking about water, we're talking about soil, or we're talking about labor, we're talking about processing capacity, talking about energy. I mean, these are all systems that would fit in perhaps to this farm bill. So that's for an intro, that's the big picture.
Well, so let's dive into it. What would a farm bill like this look like, and how would it look different than what we've got right now?
Yeah. Well, I think the first point is we don't have a farm bill. We don't have an organized strategy, right? And that's reflective. That's reflective in this system that is unbalanced, and we throw money in different places, but it's not coordinated, and it's not focused in a way that you would see people understanding we have a common vision. And okay, here's the vision, and how do we get there? Well, you get there by beginning to use strategies. You define these strategies to start moving us forward. So that I think is the premise that's missing, and we're familiar with the federal farm bill. Let's that gets the sausage gets made every few years, but you got 50 states that are all running around DC, the murkiness of DC, and a bunch of money pops out. But I want this to be a farm bill that is, written by Iowans for Iowa, right? Mm-hmm. We're the ones in charge. It's not big corporate, big ag telling us all what to do. This is our opportunity to begin to understand and put forward what's important to Iowa. And so, we have the two examples with our water and our soil. One and two of the big issues I'm running on. We have this system that is polluting our water and threatening our very ability, both in rural and urban, to drink the water, to recreate in the water, to fish and swim in the water. The 25% of our wetlands that are impaired, the 55% of the rivers that are impaired, the 67% of the lakes that are impaired, and that those numbers we're only testing about half of our rivers.
Yes.
our water bodies. So we don't even have appropriate testing to know. And I suspect, the results for the ones that aren't tested aren't going to be any better. And so then we need to begin to have an organizing strategy of, well, how do we get the system back into balance? And that has to do with how we manage water. That's a super big topic. I mean, foundationally, if you don't have water, I don't think you have agriculture. Maybe you would disagree. I don't know.
Well, no,
Uh,
I have a friend whose parents gardened in Colorado, in the Four Corners area in Colorado. And she said, well, I'm there to help my folks, and we're
yeah,
doing something with the garden that we're not gardening anymore. And I said, well, why aren't you gardening anymore? He says, there's no
yeah,
water.
yeah, no water. Yeah, we just look over to California and see what's happening now, where the agricultural interest of that water, California has been fighting over water for most of its state history, and the ag interests are the ones that are being cut back. It's true in Arizona too, and Nevada. And so one of our key, I think, concepts is the idea of water sovereignty. We got to have control of, if we want to have control of our own destiny here in Iowa, we better figure out how to have control over the sovereignty of our water, and that means both quantity and quality. Well, we talk a lot about water quality, and that's super important, but we don't think as much about water quantity. Well, what happens when you go into a drought and you're producing 50 million hogs per year? Don't they drink water? So how did the water systems, these little municipal water systems out in rural Iowa, if they are in existence, how do they handle those kinds of situations? The ethanol plants, they require a lot of water too. Well, if everyone just sticks their straw into the Jordan Aquifer, that's a finite resource. And what happens when the Jordan Aquifer, if that can't sustain those activities? So that's an example of the water. The soil it's a resource that we mentioned. It's one that we're blessed to have more class 1 soils than any other place in the world. But we're mining those soils. We've already lost a third of the topsoil in place. The rate of soil loss is 10 times what Mother Nature makes. I mean, we are literally flushing 100 and I think it's 45 million tons per year of our Iowa soil down the rivers. And you can't do that in perpetuity, 50 to 100 years from now. We may have gone through, a lot of that soil. Well, it doesn't show up on, an income statement, right? The state spends $9 billion a year. The $3 billion comes off of what I would consider to be the balance sheet of the business. It's like your home. You have a bunch of equity in your home, and now you start spending the money in your home. That's what we're doing with the soil loss, is we're spending the equity that we have, and we're doing it, I think, rather foolishly. And we're doing it under the guise, well, it's our job to feed the world. Well, I would posit the idea that, this idea of it's our job to feed. I'm not picking on China, they're good people, but a lot of our system is built to try to provide low cost feed and food to protein, animal protein, pork to China. And we're doing that, running our system into the ground. And, if I were the Chinese, I would be kind of laughing. President Xi, okay, yeah, they want to run their system into the ground and provide us with cheap food. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. So, that's the idea behind the concept of the soil. We have to have a strategy that is much more cohesive. Now, I'll give you one other system that relates, and there are others that we spoke about, but you get the idea, the listeners get the idea, and that's processing. Well, why is processing important? Well, if you want farmers to grow other things besides corn and beans, let's put a third and fourth crop in the rotation, and that might be hemp, or that might be small grains, that might be oats. Well, the problem for the most part the question isn't can they grow the crop, it's what do they do with it once they grow it.
Right.
And do they have a market? That's the first question they ask. Well, if we don't have processing capacity, we've limited our ability to develop markets. And when you look around Iowa and you say, well, we got that big processing plant that processes oats, Quaker oats in Cedar Rapids. Is that using any Iowa crops? No, that wheat is, those oats are coming from Canada. And the ADM plant that's being shut down in Keokuk because they fired all the water quality people. I think that we really had more to do with they just want to they have a more modern plant. Well, that wheat wasn't coming from Iowa either. And I'm not suggesting that those facilities that well, maybe they should be to see if we could use Iowa-based products. But you get the idea: is if the processing isn't aligned with what we can grow in Iowa, then we're not going to be able to add the third and fourth crops. We're not going to have the healthy soils. We're not going to have the healthy communities. We're not going to have healthy people because we don't have a diversity. And it reminds me almost like when the car companies bought up in the early 1900s, they bought up the trolley companies and put them all out of business. And so we've very sort of, I don't know, effectively, or I don't know what the right words are, but we didn't reinvest in any of these other markets. And so now we're kind of stuck. We're like looking around saying, well, yeah, maybe we could grow some other things, but we don't have any processing capacity. Well, that's one of the purposes of the Farm Bill, is to identify that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a general principle, that we have what we have because we have thought ourselves into it, or market forces or market actors. And if my view is that there's an undue concentration of power in a few actors and who act in their own behalf. And as some cogently pointed out, is
self-interest.
Don't blame the tiger when they eat something, because that's what tigers do. But who let the thing out? Who let the thing out of the cage? So I guess in
right.
a sense, it's a big issue to deal with that. But let's assume that maybe we don't immediately get an Iowa Farm Bill, although I love the idea. And this is not a political partisan thing. This is a policy thing. And I really like to do these interviews, not really from a partisan standpoint. Sometimes you just have to make the contract. And most important, that we actually be able to work together, because win, lose, or draw, and it's not a draw, it's either win or lose. Whatever happens on the 8th of November, we're still going to have people involved and responsible for the system. So why don't we forward an idea that whether you win or not is in the marketplace, and we can start thinking about that. So how would we start? Let's assume the best of all worlds, and we have people who are interested in doing this. How would we start? What would be the first steps for putting a system like this together, an Iowa Farm Bill?
Yeah, well, I think, as I mentioned, I think the farm bill, as I'm thinking about it, it's an organizing concept. And so there are other ways to organize. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to organize markets and systems. Remember, I think maybe on the first interview, we talked to people, you asked people, what's your background? And I said, well, I'm a market and systems person. And so that's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to organize markets, and we're trying to organize systems and how these systems perform. And the basic idea is with agriculture and with the scale of our system, you can't do things one at a time and deliver meaningful results, or at least the results that we need to see in any sense of time frame that would make sense. And I think we use the interstate highway system example. Now, if you're going to build an interstate highway system, you wouldn't sort of put out an RFP or run around to each individual landowner and say, well, maybe would you consider putting together your part of the interstate? I mean, that wouldn't work.
That wouldn't work.
And I think that's true. Yeah. And so I think the markets then begin. We have to think, I think, regionally too, because our counties, some of our counties now, I gave you the example, or I've given the example that Iowa has 99 counties. Well, the smallest population, 49, fit into the population of Polk County, which is about 500,000 people. So a lot of these counties don't have very many people in them. And so if we want to build markets and systems and there's nobody around, then we have to figure out how do we build, how do we then increase the size of the team? If we have to recruit more people, we have to think just beyond a county by county approach, right? You got to start thinking regionally. What is the region? If we're going to start putting processing facilities in for, oats, we believe that the market for oats can be developed. It's there. I've seen it, Landon Plaguey up in Franklin County takes his to 1,000 acres of oats to to the grain millers. Well, but we want people to be able to do that around Iowa. And so now, how do we build this infrastructure of this grain milling operations? And do we maybe have a strategy where, as it's getting going, it's like we can't have a facility in every region for starters, but maybe we figure out where is the lowest hanging fruit, where would the idea work first the best, and then we'll go do that. And then maybe there's some kind of support for maybe it's on transportation. Somebody says, well, I get screwed on the transportation, that's the reason I can't take my oats to the plant, the grain miller's plant. And so maybe there's some form of support, so that as that mill gets up to capacity, we get it up to capacity, and then we have a plan for, okay, now this is where the second mill is going to go over here.
Right.
Strategically, that's where it makes sense to go. And we have a similar situation with our manure. We produce so much manure in this state that the old-fashioned way of just putting it in a truck or putting it into a hose and then just transporting that hog manure 95% water. Well, that might have worked 10 or 20 years ago, but now we have 50 million animals per year. The system is stressed. The manure is an incredibly important resource. It relates to soil health. We need that manure, but we don't need it all in the form it's in, the raw form. We got to begin to figure out how to process that manure cost effectively. How do we do that? Well, there's a market connected to that manure that we haven't figured out how to perfect yet. It's the methane market. And now if we could figure out it's more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide 20 times plus, if we could build a market for the methane capture, that might become a financing source to begin to provide the capital to treat the manure. But we're also in the system missing the businesses that would go kind of like the old honey wagon driving around to the houses to pump the tank. We got to figure out how to develop a market. And what I've seen in my 20 plus years of experience, we're still stuck on the idea somehow that each manure, each hog operator wants to be a wastewater treatment operator, and we'll give them some funding. And you find the Brian Sievers of the world, the 1 in 10,000 who will go figure out how to do this for his own farm, but that's not scalable. Right. That's not a scalable approach. So you got to have a business system in the same way that we built out, how did we become the number 2 producer of wind power in the country? Well, we had market support and financing and help from the federal government, and Mid-American Energy happened to be here, and they're pretty smart people, Greg Abel and Bill Furman and others. And so they figured out how to build that market along with Alliant and others. But we got to put, as some have said to me, the wind power has to be done thoughtfully. And if it's done just based on jamming as much wind towers as we can into Iowa, that has negative impacts to tiling, that has negative impacts to people living in rural Iowa. So we have to do these things in a thoughtful, balanced way. And so it's building these markets. You asked about how do you do this? We have to vision forward, but then we have to reason back and think back to the local or the regional level of this is where we want to go. How do we do this? Invite Iowans to participate. Don't tell them, hey, we're going to jam this down your throats. That doesn't work well. So I think getting people on board with the vision, and then using the people to help build the strategy, welcome them, bring them on board, help us solve these problems. Use the ingenuity of the Iowa people to get us to where we want to go. I think we can do this.
Yeah, I don't believe there's anything standing in our way except the imagination and will to do it, and being able to convene people, whoever ends up being the players. Yeah. Those are the people who we need to work with. And then also part of the reason I do these interviews is you just put ideas out into the marketplace. You never know who's going to be listening to this. And from my vantage point here in Fairfield, I really see, not being a farmer, not having any specific expertise, but being involved in an organization that interests itself in this, There are so many people working on this problem in Iowa and outside of Iowa. There's plenty of solutions. I don't think that we actually lack solutions. We simply lack the will and the process to get the systems going and to do the vision forward and reason back. I love that. And we have to decide where we want to go, but
Yeah,
then we have to use our reason and our innovative
yeah,
powers to,
yeah,
and then our powers to choose, right? Okay, activate. We're going to start with this and this and
yeah,
this. John, this is really a beautiful vision. I'm sure we could go into a lot more weeds, but I wanted to just give
yeah,
a sense of, first of all, what you stand for. So when they go to vote on the 8th of November, they'll think of, would we like a guy like this as our Secretary of
yeah,
Ag? For me personally,
yeah,
my answer is yes. And again,
yeah,
whatever happens, this is an idea that we must forward. So whoever listens to this
yeah,
interview, even if this isn't your
right.
cup of tea, pass it on to someone else. We can start a
Yeah,
thought contagion that will
yes,
help bring this about. That's how change
yeah,
happens, in my experience.
yeah, yeah. That's well, and the concepts of the Overton window, where you start throwing out the ideas that at one point in time could seem to be too extreme, and then the Overton window can kind of shift and back and forth into to ideas of consideration. And I think frankly, it's one of the strengths of this country
Yes.
is the fact that we're allowed to think the thoughts we want to think and share and express and debate those. I mean, that's part of the reason I run for office is because I want the ideas to be out there and I want to debate them as you and have people consider them. And so in terms of when we go to the ballot box, we're selecting, we're voting for people ultimately that we hope will have good judgment, right? I mean, we're hoping that the decisions that they are responsible for are good ones, and judgment is based on experience, I think, and a set of values, and so my values, and I have those up on the Twitter account, Norwood John, uh, last name, first name, are first of all, independence. I think that's important. I'm not a preacher of big ag, coming out of that particular background and so forth. I have an agricultural background. I have a forestry related degree from the Yale Forestry School. So I have training. I have experience in agriculture related and systems and markets. That an MBA too. So I understand flow of money. But that independence, that's one of the key points. I'm a person of inquiry. Inquiry is so important. The best leaders are the ones that ask lots of questions. You see that through our presidential history. I think the best presidents were ones who didn't know all the answers, but they knew what the right questions were to ask. And so asking good questions is important. Rationality, I think, is super important. You have to understand emotion, and you have to be able to, I think, share, be empathetic when people, because we are emotional creatures, we have to try to understand people. So emotions are important, but ultimately we should be leading with reason and rationality. So that's important. Humility to me is incredibly important, because that's also how you build trust with people. You're not going to get anywhere if you can't build trust. And if you're the bull in the china shop and you just go in there and you pretend like you know all the answers and nobody does, then you're undermining trust. So humility is super important. And then I think that we spoke about it before, patience. The idea that I think in this position, you have to have a sense of urgency, which I don't see at all, or not enough of with my current opponent. And so having the patience, but having sense of urgency and intention and focus, but yet understanding we're not going to go so quickly that we make bad decisions, and we're not going to go so quickly that we don't get anybody else on board, because that old African saying about if you want to if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that's what we need to do. We need to bring, this can't be one party telling another party what to do. This is Republicans and Democrats and independents. It's basically Iowans saying, yeah, this is important to us. And so those are important. And then faith, I think I talked about that maybe before, faith in the Iowa people, the strength of the Iowa people, strength and faith in the innovativeness of the American people and our system, and flow of capital, and faith in, I think a better tomorrow, and in a higher power that each of us chooses to who we choose to follow. Those are all, I think, part of my value system that I think, combined with my experience, which includes East Coast, West Coast, and Iowa for over 20 years, you got to have a big picture perspective. You can't be living in a bubble and expect that you're going to be able to move the needle, I think. So that's a little bit about me, why people might want to vote for me, and check me out at, Norwood, 4iowa.com. Go to the Facebook page, go to Twitter, those handles as well. And I'd appreciate people's consideration and hopefully their votes.
Wonderful, John. Well, you already got mine. And I'm sure you'll get many more. Thank you so much. And this will not be the last time we record a conversation.
You're welcome.
We just got to go deeper and deeper over time. All right. Take care.
Yes. Sounds good. See you, Bob.